The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council's primary station hummed with an undercurrent of nervous energy that had been building for the past 3 solar cycles. Ambassador Zixth of the Ethereal Dominion adjusted his translucent form as he floated above the council chamber's central platform, his gaseous tendrils flickering with barely contained anxiety. The emergency session had been called after the most recent intelligence reports from the Outer Ring territories, and the news they contained was nothing short of catastrophic. Esteemed members of the council, Zixth began, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance that his species used for formal addresses. We face an unprecedented threat to the stability of our galactic civilization. The species known as humans from the 3rd planet of the Sol system have not only refused our standard integration protocols, but they have begun constructing what our xenobiologists can only describe as mobile warfare. Platforms of incomprehensible scale, the chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds chittering from the insectoid hive mind representatives, deep rumbling from the silicon-based Titan Confederation, and the melodic tones of concern from the aquatic depth dwellers. Each species expressed their alarm in their own way, but the message was universal: fear. Supreme Counselor Vexara, a member of the ancient Psych Collective whose species had overseen galactic peace for over 10 millennia, raised one of her forearms for silence. Her mental projections filled the chamber with calming waves of telepathic influence, a technique that had prevented countless wars throughout the galaxy's recorded history. Ambassador Zixth, please elaborate on these warfare platforms. Our preliminary scouts reported standard defensive installations round their homeworld. Nothing that would concern a civilization with our technological capabilities. Zixth's form shimmered with embarrassment, a trait that all council members had learned to recognize in his species. Supreme Counselor, I'm afraid our initial assessments were inadequate. The humans have not built defensive installations. They have constructed what can only be described as artificial moons, massive mobile fortresses that dwarf even our largest dreadnoughts. Our deep space reconnaissance indicates they possess at least 12 of these constructs, each one capable of supporting a population in the millions and armed with weapons systems that our analysts cannot fully comprehend. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. The Galactic Council had maintained peace through a careful balance of overwhelming technological superiority and diplomatic finesse. No species in the known galaxy possessed the resources or the audacity to construct weapons of such magnitude. The very concept challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which their civilization was built. Fleet Admiral Kethmer of the Warrior Caste, a species that had served as the Council's military arm for centuries, stepped forward. His exoskeleton gleamed with the ceremonial markings of 1,000 victories, each one representing a conflict resolved through the Council's superior firepower and strategic acumen. Supreme Counselor, with respect, no species possesses the industrial capacity to construct such vessels. Our economic models indicate that the resources required would bankrupt entire star systems. The humans have only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Surely they cannot have developed such capabilities in the brief time since our first contact protocols were initiated. Before Zixth could respond, the chamber's central holographic display activated, casting a 3-dimensional image that made even the most stoic council members recoil in shock. The image showed a construct that defied every principle of spaceship design known to galactic civilization. It was not sleek or efficient like council vessels, nor was it the crude but functional design typical of emerging species. Instead, it was a massive, angular monstrosity that seemed to have been carved from the very asteroids of space itself. The construct stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, its surface bristling with weapons emplacements, docking bays, and what appeared to be entire cities built into its superstructure. Most disturbing of all were the massive engines that propelled it through space, not the elegant gravity manipulators used by advanced civilizations, but primitive yet incredibly powerful fusion drives that left trails of superheated plasma in their wake. This is the smallest of the 12 confirmed constructs, Zixth continued, his voice now carrying undertones of genuine terror. Our xenopsychologists have designated it as a war giant based on intercepted human communications. The humans appear to have named this particular vessel New Sparta, and according to our translations, it serves as their primary military academy and training facility. The implications hit the council members like a physical blow. A military academy the size of a small moon meant that the humans were not just building weapons. They were preparing for a war on a scale that the galaxy had never witnessed. The Council's standard protocols for dealing with aggressive species involved swift, overwhelming force designed to demonstrate their technological superiority and encourage immediate surrender. But how could they demonstrate superiority against an enemy that had already surpassed their largest achievements? Supreme Counselor Vexara's mental projections began to waver, a sign that even her ancient and disciplined mind was struggling to process the magnitude of the threat. Ambassador Zixith, what is the Council's intelligence assessment of human intentions? Are they preparing for defensive or offensive operations? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Zixith's form flickered through several color spectrums before settling on a deep purple. That his species associated with impending doom. Supreme Counselor, our analysis suggests that the humans are preparing for both. Intercepted communications indicate that they view the Council's integration protocols as a form of subjugation. They have rejected our offers of membership, our trade agreements, and our cultural exchange programs. More concerning still, they have begun what they term defensive preparations in anticipation of what they call inevitable galactic aggression. The phrase inevitable galactic aggression struck the Council members like a thunderbolt. For millennia, the Council had prided itself on being a force for peace and stability in the galaxy. They had never been seen as aggressors, merely as the necessary arbiters of conflicts between lesser species. The idea that an entire civilization viewed them as an existential threat was both insulting and terrifying. Fleet Admiral Kethmer's mandibles clicked in what his species considered deep thought. Supreme Counselor, if I may, there is another aspect to this situation that our military analysts find deeply troubling. The humans have not simply built large ships. They have fundamentally reimagined the concept of space warfare. Our vessels are designed for speed, precision, and technological superiority. These human constructs appear to be designed for one purpose: to absorb incredible amounts of damage while delivering overwhelming firepower. He gestured to the holographic display, which zoomed in on specific sections of the human construct. Observe the armor plating. It's not energy-resistant composite like our hulls, but rather layers upon layers of what appears to be processed asteroid material. Our analysts estimate that it would take a sustained bombardment from an entire Council battle group to penetrate even the outer defenses. And notice the weapon systems. They're not elegant particle beams or gravitational disruptors, but rather what can only be described as accelerated projectile weapons of enormous scale. The display shifted to show massive gun emplacements that looked more like architectural features than weapons. Each one was larger than most Council frigates, and they were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire that would create an impenetrable wall of destruction around the construct. The humans have abandoned subtlety in favor of raw, terrifying effectiveness. Kethmer continued. These vessels are not meant to dance through space like our ships. They are meant to anchor themselves in a position and dare any enemy to try to dislodge them. It's a philosophy of warfare that we have never encountered, and one that our current tactical doctrines are utterly unprepared to counter. As the full scope of the human threat became clear, the Council chamber fell into a silence that was more profound than any in the recorded history of galactic civilization. The species that had maintained peace through strength now faced an enemy that had built strength beyond their comprehension. The careful balance of power that had prevented galactic war for millennia was about to be shattered by a species that had learned to think about conflict in ways that challenged every assumption about civilized warfare. Supreme Counselor Vexara closed her eyes and extended her consciousness across the vast network of the Psych Collective, seeking wisdom from the accumulated knowledge of her species. What she found there was not comfort, but rather a growing certainty that the galaxy was about to witness the birth of a new kind of warfare, one that would change the fundamental nature of interstellar civilization forever. The emergency diplomatic mission to the Sol system had been conceived as a last desperate attempt to prevent what the Council's war computers had calculated as an inevitable galactic catastrophe. 3 months had passed since the initial revelation about Earth's war giants, and the intelligence reports had only grown more disturbing. The humans had not only continued their construction projects, but had begun deploying their massive fleets in formations that defied every principle of space tactics known to galactic civilization. Ambassador Zixith found himself aboard the Council's most advanced diplomatic vessel, the Harmony's Edge. As it approached the outer boundaries of the Sol system, the ship's complement included representatives from 12 major species, each chosen for their expertise in xenopsychology, military strategy, and cultural analysis. What they discovered as they entered human space, however, would fundamentally alter their understanding of both warfare and the species they had so gravely underestimated. By the ancient codes, whispered Dr. Melthara, the Council's chief xenobiologist, as her multiple eyes focused on the tactical display. They've turned their entire star system into a fortress. The display showed not just the 12 war giants that intelligence had reported, but an intricate network of defensive platforms, mobile asteroid bases, and what appeared to be entire planetoids that had been hollowed out and converted into weapons platforms. The humans had not simply built ships, they had reimagined their entire solar system as a single, integrated military installation. Most shocking of all was the discovery that several of the war giants were not in space at all, but rather anchored in the atmospheres of gas giants, drawing power directly from the storms and magnetic fields of the planets themselves. The concept was so audacious that it had never occurred to any galactic civilization to attempt it. The humans had essentially turned their own planets into ammunition depots and power sources for weapons of unimaginable scale. Captain Nexenel, Zixth called to the ship's commander. Please establish communication with the human authorities. We must attempt to understand their intentions before the situation escalates. Beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution, the communication that followed would become legendary in galactic history, not for its diplomatic success, but for the profound cultural shock it delivered to the Council's understanding of human nature. The human who appeared on their screens was not the primitive savage they had expected, nor the militaristic tyrant their psychological profiles had suggested. Instead, they found themselves face to face with Admiral Sarah Chen, a woman whose calm demeanor and intelligent eyes seemed completely at odds with the massive weapons of destruction surrounding her. Representatives of the Galactic Council, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed genuine despite the circumstances. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Defense Force. We appreciate your willingness to engage in dialogue, though I must confess that your timing is somewhat awkward. We're currently in the middle of what we call graduation exercises for our latest class of war giant commanders. The casual mention of graduation exercises sent chills through the diplomatic party. The humans spoke of operating their massive weapons platforms as if they were routine educational tools, suggesting a level of military preparation that went far beyond anything the Council had imagined. Admiral Chen, Zixith replied, his translucent form flickering with nervous energy. The Galactic Council has observed your species' military preparations with growing concern. We have come to discuss the possibility of peaceful integration into the galactic community and to address any misunderstandings about our intentions. Admiral Chen's expression shifted subtly, and for a moment, the diplomatic party saw something in her eyes that made their worst fears seem understated. It was not anger or aggression, but rather a profound sadness mixed with steely determination. Ambassador, I appreciate your peaceful intentions, but I'm afraid you've arrived at a time when Earth has already made certain irreversible decisions about our future in the galaxy. Before Zixith could respond, the tactical display around them suddenly filled with new contacts. The war giants, which had appeared to be stationary defensive platforms, began to move with a grace and coordination that defied their massive size. What the Council had interpreted as crude, immobile fortresses were revealing themselves to be incredibly sophisticated weapons platforms, capable of maneuvers that would have been impossible for ships of their size. You see, Admiral Chen continued, her voice maintaining its calm tone even as her fleet demonstrated capabilities that terrorized the watching diplomats. Earth's xenopsychologists have spent the last 50 years studying every species in the Galactic Council. We've analyzed your history, your expansion patterns, your integration protocols, and your definition of peaceful coexistence. What we've discovered is that the Council's idea of peace involves the systematic absorption of independent civilizations into a homogeneous galactic culture. The accusation struck the diplomatic party like a physical blow. The Council had always prided itself on respecting the cultural diversity of its member species, but from the human perspective, their integration policies appeared to be a form of cultural genocide disguised as peaceful expansion. We've seen what happens to species that join the Council, Admiral Chen continued, her words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Within a few generations, they become pale reflections of their former selves, their unique cultures diluted and eventually erased in favor of galactic harmony. The Zephyrian Empire, the Crystal Communes, the Void Wanderers, all once proud, independent civilizations that now exist only as footnotes in Council historical records. The specific examples she cited sent shockwaves through the diplomatic party. The human knowledge of galactic history was far more comprehensive than anyone had realized, and their interpretation of that history painted the Council not as benevolent peacekeepers, but as a form of cultural imperialism that had been operating for millennia. Admiral Dr. Melthara interjected, her multiple voices harmonizing in distress. The Council has always respected the autonomy of its member species. Integration is voluntary, and cultural preservation is a fundamental principle of our civilization. Admiral Chen's smile carried no warmth. Doctor, we've intercepted communications from 17 different species over the past century. Each one initially rejected Council membership, and each one eventually voluntarily joined after experiencing economic isolation, trade blockades, and what your records describe as minor military interventions. The pattern is quite clear once you look for it. The revelation that humans had been conducting extensive espionage operations against the Council for decades was almost as shocking as their military preparations. It suggested a level of strategic planning and long-term thinking that challenged every assumption about their species' capabilities. But the most interesting discovery, Admiral Chen continued, her voice taking on a tone that made the diplomatic party's blood run cold, was learning about the Council's contingency plans for stubborn species, the orbital bombardment protocols, the economic warfare strategies, the biological weapons programs, all designed to force compliance from civilizations that refused to surrender their independence. The humans knew about the Council's most classified military secrets, information that was supposedly secured by the most advanced encryption systems in galactic civilization. The implications were staggering. Earth had not only prepared for war with the Council, but they had done so with full knowledge of the Council's capabilities and intentions. So you see, Ambassador, Admiral Chen concluded, Earth's war giants were not built to conquer the galaxy. They were built to ensure that humanity never becomes another footnote in the Council's history of peaceful integration. We have no intention of threatening any species that respects our independence, but we will not allow our civilization to be absorbed into your galactic empire. The communication ended with Admiral Chen's image fading from the screen, leaving the diplomatic party to contemplate the magnitude of their failure. They had come to the Sol system believing they were dealing with a primitive species that had stumbled upon advanced technology. Instead, they had discovered a civilization that had spent decades preparing for this exact confrontation, with a level of strategic sophistication that matched or exceeded their own. As the Harmony's Edge began its journey back to Council space, the diplomatic party realized that they were not just reporting a failed negotiation, but rather the end of the Council's unchallenged dominance over galactic civilization. The humans had not simply built weapons, they had built a completely new paradigm for interstellar relations, one based on mutual respect rather than gradual absorption. The war giants that continued to patrol the Sol system were not just weapons, platforms, but symbols of a new kind of civilization, one that was prepared to pay any price to maintain its independence an identity in a galaxy that had forgotten the value of diversity. The Council would have to decide whether they were willing to accept this new reality, or face the consequences of challenging a species that had turned preparation for war into an art form that transcended anything they had previously encountered. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 6 standard days after the diplomatic mission's return. But the chamber that had once been filled with the confident deliberations of Galactic leadership now resonated with something far more dangerous: desperation. The massive holographic displays surrounding the assembly showed not just the Sol System's defenses, but intelligence reports that had been flooding in from across the galaxy, reports that painted a picture far more complex and terrifying than anyone had imagined. Honored members, Supreme Counselor Vexara began, her mental projections carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. We face not just a military threat, but a complete collapse of the galactic order that has maintained peace for 10 millennia. The humans have done more than build weapons. They have inspired something that we believed we had eliminated from civilized space: the concept of absolute resistance to integration. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives from dozens of species began speaking simultaneously, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and confusion. But it was Fleet Admiral Kethmer who silenced them all with a revelation that struck at the very heart of galactic civilization. The humans are not alone, he announced, his exoskeleton now bearing the emergency markings of a species facing extinction. Over the past 72 hours, we have received independence declarations from 47 member species. They're calling it the Human Inspiration Movement, and they're demanding complete withdrawal of all council oversight from their territories. The implications were staggering. For the first time in galactic history, established council members were not just expressing dissatisfaction with specific policies, but were fundamentally rejecting the entire concept of galactic unity. The humans had not simply built weapons, they had weaponized the idea of independence itself. But that's not the worst of it, Admiral Kethmer continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute defeat. 18 of the rebelling species have begun construction of their own war giants, using modified human designs that have been transmitted across the galaxy through encrypted channels. The humans have not just prepared for war, they've prepared to teach others how to wage it. The revelation that human military technology was spreading throughout the galaxy sent shockwaves through the assembly. The Council's entire strategic doctrine was based on maintaining technological superiority over individual species, while preventing them from forming meaningful alliances. The humans had not only achieved technological parity, but had begun sharing their innovations with anyone willing to resist Council authority. Dr. Melfara, who had accompanied the diplomatic mission, stepped forward with an expression of profound confusion. Supreme Counselor, our analysis of human psychology suggested that they were an individualistic species, prone to internal conflict. How have they managed to coordinate a galaxy-wide resistance movement while simultaneously maintaining unity within their own civilization? The question struck at the heart of the Council's fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. Ambassador Zixeth, who had spent more time studying the humans than any other council member, flickered through several color spectrums before settling on a shade that his species associated with revelatory understanding. Because we were looking at them wrong, he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had finally grasped a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. We assumed that human individualism meant they were incapable of unified action, but their individualism isn't about isolation, it's about the right to choose their own path. When faced with an external threat to that choice, they don't fragment. They unite with an intensity that we've never encountered. The observation was confirmed by the latest intelligence reports, which showed that the human war giants were not commanded by a single military hierarchy, but rather by a complex network of autonomous commanders who somehow managed to coordinate their actions with perfect precision. It was a form of military organization that defied every principle of command structure known to galactic civilization. They've created something new, Zixth continued, his form now glowing with the pale light of epiphany. A civilization that combines individual freedom with collective action, diversity with unity, independence with cooperation, and they've shared that model with every species willing to listen. The holographic displays around the chamber suddenly shifted to show a new image that made even the most composed council members recoil in horror. It was a tactical projection of the galaxy 6 months in the future. Assuming current trends continued, nearly a third of council space was shaded in red, indicating territories that would be under the control of the resistance movement. But more disturbing still was the network of lines connecting these territories' trade routes, communication channels, and military alliances that formed a shadow government spanning half the galaxy. They're not just resisting integration, Supreme Counselor Vexara realized. Her mental projections now carrying waves of genuine terror. They're building an alternative to the Council itself, a galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation rather than mandatory unity. The realization that the humans had not simply prepared for war, but had prepared to rebuild galactic civilization according to their own principles, represented a threat that went far beyond military considerations. The Council's entire existence was predicated on the belief that diverse species could only coexist under a single, unified authority. The human model suggested that this fundamental assumption was not only wrong, but actively harmful to the civilizations it claimed to protect. Fleet Admiral Kethmer S. Mandibles clicked in what his species considered deep contemplation. Supreme Counselor, our military analysts have run every possible scenario for a direct confrontation with the human alliance. Even if we could defeat their war giants, which is far from certain, the cost would be catastrophic. We would be forced to destroy entire star systems, commit genocide on a scale that would make us the very monsters the humans claim we are. The moral implications of the conflict were becoming as challenging as the military ones. The Council had always justified its actions as necessary for the greater good of galactic civilization. But how could they claim moral authority while contemplating the destruction of civilizations whose only crime was refusing to surrender their independence? There's another consideration, Dr. Melthara added, her multiple voices harmonizing. In distress, our psychological profiles indicate that the humans are not motivated by conquest or territorial expansion. They simply want to exist as they choose to exist. If we could guarantee their independence, they might be willing to coexist peacefully with the Council. The suggestion of coexistence with an independent human civilization represented a complete departure from 10 millennia of Council doctrine. It would require acknowledging that the Council's authority was not absolute, that there were forms of civilization that could exist outside their control, without threatening galactic stability. But even as the Council members grappled with these philosophical challenges, the holographic displays around them showed that the window for peaceful resolution was rapidly closing. The human war giants were no longer confined to the Sol system. 3 of the massive constructs had begun moving toward the galactic core, their destinations unknown but their intentions clear. They were preparing to project power across the galaxy on a scale that would make traditional concepts of territorial control obsolete. The humans have forced us to confront a truth we've spent millennia avoiding, Supreme Counselor Vexara said, her mental projections now carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Unity cannot be imposed from above. It must emerge from the voluntary cooperation of free civilizations. If we continue to resist this truth, we will not just lose the war, we will lose the moral authority to call ourselves guardians of galactic civilization. As the session drew to a close, the Council members found themselves facing a choice that would determine the future of the galaxy. They could maintain their traditional authority through force, knowing that victory would require them to become the very tyrants the humans accused them of being, or they could accept the human model of voluntary cooperation, acknowledging that their 10 millennium reign as the galaxy's ultimate authority was coming to an end. The war giants continued their patrol of human space, no longer symbols of resistance, but harbingers of a new era in galactic civilization. The Council had not been prepared for Earth's fleet of giants, but more importantly, they had not been prepared for the ideas those giants represented. The galaxy would never be the same again, and neither would the ancient institution that had once believed itself capable of controlling the destiny of every species among the stars. In the end, the humans had won their greatest victory not through the firepower of their massive weapons, but through the simple act of proving that there was another way for civilizations to coexist, one based on mutual respect rather than imposed unity. The war giants had become the guardians not just of human independence, but of the fundamental right of all species to choose their own path among the stars.